Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
Do you know, I find it hard now to not say, I'm Hilary Salt, standing for Council in Sales Central.
Right.
Because I've got used to saying that so quickly now.
How's the campaign going?
It's hard work, lots of leafleting, lots of thinking about how to reach people that you wouldn't normally reach. And only 2 weeks to go is, I suppose, the nice thing, because it is hard work.
Less than 2 weeks to go now.
Less than 2 weeks. And you?
2 weeks, it'll be all over. Yeah, no, really good. I had a long day of leafleting yesterday, and I'm very tired. My back is hurting now.
Yeah.
I had some interesting conversations. One guy that said, Rupert Lowe's the man for me, which I thought was interesting because a lot of the Rupert Lowe his party now is Restore Britain, which is quite a right-wing party. And a lot of people say that that's just an internet thing and it doesn't actually resonate in the general public. But you can see that it is more, he's got the word out there more than you might think. So,
I had somebody say that to me on doorstep as well. And I just said, well, he's not standing in this constituency. So, and the guy was quite, happy to have a chat. I think I talked him round.
And then probably the most interesting conversation I had yesterday was this guy that said, no, I'm voting for Nige, meaning Farage, of course. And I said, okay, why is that? And he said, I know he'll be a rubbish prime minister, but at least he's talking about the boats issue.
Yes.
And I thought, that's interesting. And that kind of sums up, I would say, a lot of the mood of the everyday Brit.
Yeah, that gap between ordinary people and our politicians is definitely the thing that's driving a lot of thinking, isn't it? So we wrote yesterday, weren't we? And it was actually St George's Day yesterday.
It was.
So I had my England shirt, my cricket England shirt, and I was wishing everybody happy St George's Day.
We took some flags, didn't we?
We did.
Whilst campaigning.
Yeah. If anybody's not yet listened to the episode that we recorded a year ago on St George's Day with Pete Ramsey, I think that is worth another listen to on sovereignty and why sovereignty is important.
And the nation.
And the nation, absolutely. Yeah. So for today,
yes,
we've got two things to talk about, news items for today. I've got a quite upsetting one to talk about, really, which is maternal deaths.
Okay.
So I'm suggesting we do that second because it'll be hard to come back from that, I suspect, and have any banter. So shall we do yours first?
Well, let's start with lots of banter. So today I wanted to talk about this story that I read in Politico, which says that Zach Polanski plots review to junk Green's unpopular policies.
Okay.
And I thought it was an interesting one because it shines a light on a couple of things that we've been talking about, and particularly in this new landscape of what's going on, I think it reveals some things. So I've just realised the laptop is too far away for me to reach the microphone. There we go. So a couple of the policies that are set to be scrapped according to Politico, and some people have questioned this, but are the motorway speed limit policy. I'm not sure if it's a actual party policy or whether it's been put forward as a motion, but the policy was to limit the speed limit on motorways to 55 mile an hour, which is quite slow.
Very slow.
Miles an hour. And interestingly, Rupert Lowe's party, Restore Britain, have just announced a policy to increase the speed limits to 80 mile an hour. That's a really, really interesting explanation of what politics is doing at the moment and who people are trying to appeal to. I think that's really, really interesting. It says something. We can come back to it. But another one is that the article says that this was a couple of officials that are unnamed from the Green Party that have spoken to Politico. Is what they say. And these particular officials were wary of the return of a motion that actually avoided being debated at the spring conference just because of some technical issues. But the motion was Zionism is racism. And they're worried that that's going to come back as a motion. There was another one which is the party's states on its website that they want to aim for a world without borders, and they're worried about the wording of that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that are supposedly going to be scrapped. Now, I think this is interesting because what happens when a party starts out appealing to a certain section of the population and then tries to come into the mainstream is they try and they try to make their platform more palatable for the average person. And this happens all the way through, and you can see how parties change their policies as they go.
Yeah.
My view is very much stick to your guns. If you think that the motorway speed limit should be 55 miles an hour, go for it. Right? Let's let the public decide on these things. If you think that that there should be a world without borders, then state that. Like, I want to hear what my politicians believe, and I want to hear what parties believe. Now, the Green Party, they have quite a strange mechanism for enacting policy.
That was going to be my question. How do they set policy?
How democratic is it? Exactly. And something that Polanski said is that when they had 20,000 members, it was very different to now that they've got 220,000 members, and they have to adapt, they have to change. And obviously it's not him as leader that decides on what policy is going to be, but they are, I think, attempting to create a more democratic way of creating policy.
Is that right? Because my guess would be they'd be looking to create a less democratic way of setting policy.
That's what they've said.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but they've also ditched a controversial push to promote what they deemed normal births. Have you heard of this?
No.
So there was a section in their manifesto which talked about reducing the rate of caesarean sections.
Okay.
And wanting to promote normal births in inverted commas and speech marks. And they want to get rid of that because that seems to be controversial. And there's a quote from one of these officials that he said, right now it's like we've got a list of policies for the Daily Mail to ring us up about. And I thought, that's really interesting. They're starting to think about the pushback from the right-wing press and how they're going to be attacked on these things. Question for you, what's the most controversial Green Party policy, or what's the one that you think is going to be most unpopular with the electorate?
Is it not legalise all drugs? That's the one I was waiting for you to say something about. You've not said it yet.
I mean, I don't think that's mentioned in this article, but yeah, that's the one that kind of sticks out, I think. And what I think is interesting, and it's similar to the World Without Borders point, is that you could make a case for, in an idealistic world, we wouldn't have borders in the way that they are currently. I think that there would always be a distinction, even if, there's free movement between two countries. You have to have some sort of line, otherwise there's no... those places no longer have an identity, right? A border is a way of identifying something, right, in a philosophical sense. But they might be saying, in that idea of a world without borders, they don't want massive fences and barbed wire and etc. That might be a noble goal as a world in 200 years' time or whatever, to have such a peaceful and democratic world that we're able to do these things. The point is, like, you're campaigning in 2026 local elections. Why say something like that? You're just going to annoy a load of people.
Yeah.
And the people that are already on board, they don't need you to say that for them to support you.
But you're making a distinction there, I think, between which of your policies you push and whether or not you have that policy. So you could still have that policy, but not mention it, couldn't you?
But so much of our politics is sound bites. Right, the World Without Borders point is a soundbite. It's not a policy. You can't have a policy to have a world without borders. You might have a policy, and they do, of safe and legal routes for immigration and asylum. Yeah, and they, Zach Polanski frequently speaks up about the issue of refugees and says, refugees are welcome here, etc., etc. That can be your angle, but then to say we want a world without borders, it's just unnecessary, and you're just going to get attacked a lot. So what I would say is decide on what your policies are, decide on what you want, and decriminalising drugs could be that, right? That's a genuine policy, anything that's just sound bites and can get you attacked, there's no point in saying it.
And I think I might have driven you off course. You were about to say, what is the mechanism for deciding policy? What is the mechanism? Is it?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I know in the SDP, but I don't know in the Green Party.
Right.
But they do have motions at conference.
Yes.
Their conference will be in the autumn, like ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple of other things then. So the Reform ditched their 2024 manifesto in the autumn. And it's something I didn't know about this until researching this yesterday. So I think it's an attempt to kind of very much separate themselves from the things they've pledged in the past so they can come up with new things and they don't have to kind of go through with a fine comb the policies that they'd already suggested and show that they disagree with them.
Yeah.
I think that's the mentality for it. But I mean, it was amazing that I didn't see anything about that they just ditched the whole manifesto, which of course was called a contract, not a manifesto, according to Mr. Farage.
And there's no democracy involved in their policy setting framework, is there?
No, I mean, it's quite, it's quite amusing in some ways because there is literally no democratic element to the policy making and reform. They just kind of come out with stuff. And to be honest, if I'm being a bit mean, like there isn't any policy anyway, so there's nothing to really create. I'm on the Reform website.
Okay.
I've been on the internet recently. A couple of policies then. There was one that says... I'm losing my place now. So they've got a lot of these sort of bullet points of this is what we'll do, this is what we'll do. And this is since they ditched their manifesto. And they make these sort of wide claims about, number 14 is help British people have children. Okay. And you think, okay, that sounds like a good thing to do, helping people have children. I'll read you the policy. Family is the foundation of society. We will reduce the financial pressures that stop working people starting families, support parents, and remove policies that make having children unaffordable. Britain's future depends on supporting the next generation.
I've no idea what that means.
That's it.
Okay, so there's no
like we will do this or we will do that. It's just I love it because it's like, and people have used this term slopulist. Have you heard of this?
I think you've used that term before. I still don't really understand it, to be honest. You might have to explain it.
So of course it mixes populist with slop, and slop is a term that's being thrown about a lot recently because of AI and things just get random rubbish that's getting put on the internet.
Okay.
And a lot of what people are saying is that quite a few populists out there are just throwing stuff onto the internet to say, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's a classic example of that. It's like, help people have children. Brilliant. What are you going to do? We're going to remove policies that make having children unaffordable. Okay.
What are they?
That's like saying, we want to increase wages. We're going to make sure that people are getting paid more.
Provide free childcare.
What? Well, yeah, I mean, there's, one thing. Well, what would you do? Well, help people have children.
Increase productivity so that we can afford, high wages in good quality jobs. One of the SDP's policy is to allow parents to share a tax allowance so that if one's working and the other isn't, they can make the most use of that tax allowance. Those are the kind of things that I would think are practical ways. Housing, yeah, absolutely. More affordable houses. Yeah, but it doesn't say any of that.
No, which is quite remarkable. So anyway, that's a bit about the Green Party's policies and some of their wackier ones.
And that's reform.
That's a bit about reform.
Yeah.
What about the SDP? What are, if somebody's attacking us, and the Daily Mail does a hit piece.
Yes.
And it goes through our manifesto and finds the wacky ones.
Yeah.
What are the policies it comes up with?
Oh, the Daily Mail.
Daily Mail. I knew this is coming. Yeah.
Oh,
go on, explain the Daily Mail. And you're now on question time.
Okay.
You're being
I've got to. You want
interrogated.
Me to support it?
No, I want you to be honest.
Oh, right. Okay.
But explain to us what the Daily Mail policy is.
So the Daily Mail policy says that all children will run a mile daily, presumably meaning the days that they're in school, so Monday to Friday. Yes, walk or run, yes. I just really worry that it's impossible to do practically. The idea that, I'm presuming they can't run it on their own, so the teachers are running it too. Not sure that all teachers would embrace that as a thing that they should be spending their time doing. I'm not sure I want to sit next to a sweaty boy who's run a mile. Sorry if that's not a nice thing to say, but my memory of what boys smelt like in school was bad enough without them running a daily mile.
I was thinking this recently, that we would do PE lessons in the morning or at any point in the day. We wouldn't shower and then we'd go back to class.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Although, I think when I was a kid, you only had a bath once a week, I know people think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Like when you get sewn into your clothes, but your winter clothes, right? And then you're left in your winter clothes for 6 months.
Well, you weren't sewn in, but yeah, you did.
That's
you
the
did.
Stories I hear about the Victorian times.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite that old, Sebastian.
The couple other policies from the Greens that they're wanting to axe is abolishing the monarchy.
Okay.
And
happy with that.
What do you mean, that they're abolishing the monarchy, or
they're axing
they're
abolishing it? Sorry,
you want to abolish the monarchy?
I would do, yeah.
Oh, we really disagree on this.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you know I'm very very much pro monarchy?
Yeah.
Get that quiet. And making private landlords illegal. That's another one that they've got in there that they're thinking of cutting.
Making private landlords illegal, so there'd be the only landlords would be public service bodies, councils and so on.
So a friend of ours, Charlie Winstanley, who wrote a book called Bricking It.
Yes.
Which we could definitely put in the description if anyone wants to go and read it. On the housing crisis, we went to his book launch and he talked about the fact that post-Second World War, when there was a massive increase in the state building capacity, the number of private landlords decreased massively because of that.
Yeah,
I think it's a very noble goal as a state to do something like that. You know, the state should be involved, and a natural consequence of that, where you will have fewer and fewer people that are making money off being a landlord.
Yes.
Now, there's no way that I would put in a manifesto, we're going to make private landlords illegal, because what it sounds like is people that are either landlords or renting and are very happy with their relationship. It's like, well, you're making this thing illegal.
Yeah.
It's a really bad PR strategy. I think a lot of their policies, like abolishing the monarchy as well, they're starting to realise that if they want to be popular in the mainstream, they have to ditch a lot of these things. Mm. I just think that, and this is what's interesting about comparing the Reform and the Greens, and I think they're relevant in a way that the Labour and the Tories just aren't relevant at the moment at all, is that they're both trying to do the same thing from either sides of the political spectrum. And both are going to find it really, really difficult because they're going to move away from their base.
Yes.
Right. So Reform's base, and I don't mean the people in the streets that we meet that are saying, I'm going to vote for Nige. That's not Reform's base. They recognise there are problems with Reform, but they want to vote for Reform as a bit of they have no other alternative, right?
Yeah.
That's what they feel. That's what we're trying to convince them otherwise. Reform's base are much more economically liberal and economically sort of free market. The core Reform supporters, and I went to a talk from somebody that works within Reform, right in the centre of it recently. I told you about, and it was amazing to me that he said, I questioned him and said, how is Reform going to move across and try and be more palatable to the majority of the public who are very much in favour of things like the NHS and much more like economically left-wing ideas. And he said, oh, no, I don't think those people are really left-wing, the people I was talking about, the meeting on the streets. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And that's where a politician will lose. You have to meet people where they're at, right?
Yeah.
You can't say, oh, no, but we're right. We just have to convince the public that they're wrong. It's not going to work. So Reform are going to have to try and move left on the economy, and they'll find difficulties within that as they publish more policies. And Greens are having to move sort of away, or let's say right on culture. And right on culture for the Greens is like you know, it's not saying much, but they're going to have to axe policies like abolishing the monarchy. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, as an STP advocate, I would say this is our opportunity of being basically in between that and saying, actually, there are some really good economic left-wing ideas out there. And a lot of the social stuff, we've just gone way too far in one direction.
Yeah.
And I think that message can resonate. Obviously, our job is to convince people that we can actually win. But it's a really interesting political landscape at the moment.
It is, absolutely. And I think it's right that whatever the guy from Reform said, a lot of people are not ready for kind of reheated Thatcherism, which feels to me what Reform is, really. So I do think a lot of Reform voting is just a way of sticking two fingers up at the establishment rather than anybody being really committed to Reform's agenda, which we don't even know what it is really, do we? As you say, it's just a lot of vibe words, would you call them?
Yeah, it's all vibes.
Yeah.
That's how you'd actually one sentence to discuss politics in 2026. It's all vibes. That's all it is. The Green Party put out a really interesting thing. So do you remember in the Gorton and Denton by-election?
Yep.
Hannah Spencer's campaign, the Green Party candidate who went on to become the MP, they did a video in Urdu and then one in Bangla, I believe, as well, Bengali. And it was criticised heavily, particularly online, people saying any election material should be in English, which I agree with. I think all election material should be in a language that of that place.
Or Welsh.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so Wales, Welsh, etc. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Now, they've really lent into this, and this is a really good way of understanding the it's all vibes thing. And they've published a set of a wording which is like, we must stop reform and reject Labour. And they published it in an election leaflet. This was Mothin Ali, the deputy leader.
Yeah.
And they've published it in all these different languages: Urdu, Arabic, Bangla, right? And I like that, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, that's what they believe. So like, stick to your guns, show us who you are. I really believe in that, and it's why I think what Rupert Lowe's doing is great. I disagree with him completely on so many political things, but it's like, that's what you believe, and there are a lot of other people that think that. So let's have it out. And I think that's interesting because the establishment, the Labour and the Tories, they wouldn't have done that. They'd have backed away and tried to kind of go away quietly on certain issues. Whereas the Greens and Reform are much more sort of gloves off, right? So they're really leaning into a lot of these things.
Yeah, but it makes it quite a heated and confrontational atmosphere, doesn't it?
Yes. That's why it's so important for us to try and rebuild that political arena where we can have those debates where you say, okay, I'm going to externalize these things. I'm not going to just think, oh, because you believe that, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And we're going to have that conversation about whether election material should be in many languages to be inclusive, or whether it should only be in English, Welsh, etc.
Yeah.
That at the moment we're sort of hopefully embarking upon that and getting towards it. I do think we're going through a transition phase where it's all a bit weird, but it will get there. I saw an interesting interview with Richard Tice, just as a little segue, but it was with, I think it was with, LBC, I can't remember which one of them, but he was asked about deporting people that have come here illegally.
Okay.
And he said, yeah, just deport them. And the person said, but how are you going to deport them? He said, well, we'll just, if they come from Afghanistan, we'll just send them back to Afghanistan. He goes, but how? And he's like, well, we'll just do it. And he's like, but we can't, you fly a plane in there and just drop them off? We don't have an agreement with Afghanistan. Yeah. And he's like, oh, well, it'll be fine. And Germany have an agreement, so Germany do deport. He made the case that Germany do it. And it's like, yeah, but Germany's got an agreement. Would you have an agreement? Because he obviously doesn't want to say he's going to sign an agreement with the Taliban to, And I thought that's another example where it's like, it's vibes. They've thrown something out there. We're going to deport people, but he hasn't got actually a clear roadmap of how he's going to do it.
Yes.
And as a party that is hoping to enter the fray of the big five, make it the big six.
Yeah.
we have to be really seriously thinking about detailed policy, and not just we want this, but how we're actually going to deliver it.
Yeah.
You know, if the civil service pushes back on certain things, how are we going to deal with that? You know, I think there's so many different questions about government and actually the mechanisms of government that it's incumbent on political parties to say how they're going to deal with those issues if they get to that position.
Yeah, and I think to be honest about how big a job it is, because it is a really, really big job to, you know, and it takes a lot of intellectual thought and consideration, and lots of consideration of the legal case and the legal background, and none of that happens through vibes.
Yeah. Okay.
Onto
your story. I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah. I think it will be a bit upsetting. So probably, I'm not sure whether we believe in trigger warnings or not, but if this is going to upset you, I would maybe stop listening. So I wanted to talk about maternal care or maternity care in the context of there is a review going on. The Baroness Amos is doing a review of all these services. And perhaps just some numbers, first of all. Do you have any idea how many pregnancies there are in the UK every year? I always like throwing a number at you, see what you get to.
200,000?
Well, I think the real answer is nobody knows.
Do you know that from QI?
Yes, yeah.
Nobody knows.
Yeah. In part because nature is very profligate, and lots of women lose babies before they even know they're pregnant, you know, so we don't really know. But it's something over 1 million.
Wow.
It's very big. Yeah. And something like 700,000 live births a year.
Wow. Way more than I thought.
Yeah. I mean, the estimates vary in terms of natural loss of babies early in pregnancy, because, you know, you generally, often you wouldn't know, but something like 20 or 25%, some people estimate it as. So it's very, very high.
That's natural.
Yeah.
Not abortion.
No, not abortion. That's people just losing babies, which is obviously, you know, massively upsetting for those people who do know about it and are looking forward to a happy event. Even more upsetting is there's about 2,500 stillbirths every year, and obviously having to go through labour and have a stillborn child must be so devastating. Also, about 2,000 babies die in the first month of life, neonatal mortality. So that's still very high. So all of that is, you know, it's really tells us something about, you know, how much we need to consider and look at some of these issues and make sure that we can provide really high quality maternity services. I wanted to focus on one particular thing just because it's been in the headlines a lot. And this is the rate of maternal deaths. So this is women who die either during the birth or shortly after it. And obviously, you know, this is a really tragic situation that families are in, where they're looking forward to perhaps the most joyous event that might happen, and they end up with the worst event that might happen. There are, over the 3-year period, 2022 to 2024, just over 250 women died in that situation. And, you know, to say up front that it's not a numbers problem, it's a tragedy problem. And that's why I think we need to engage with it. So, you know, something like 80 or 90 women a year die during or shortly after childbirth. And this is one of the things that Amos is looking at in this review. So she's looking more widely at all those other things like stillbirths and neonatal deaths, but this is one of the things she's looking at. And one of the things people might say is, oh, what, another review of maternity care? Because there have been lots. You know, you might think about there's some Morecambe Bay, Shrewsbury and Telford. There have been quite a lot of individual hospital trust investigations. But this is the first national one. There's been for, quite a few years, I think about a decade. So I think it's important that it happens. And obviously we need to see what comes out of it. But on this, she's just issued the second of her interim reports. So she did a first report and now a second interim report, which is after having invited people to provide evidence. And I mean, if you can face it, it's worth reading. It's upsetting, but it shows some of the things that can and do go wrong. She's going to report back later in the year with her final report, but we've already getting some proposals coming out of what she's done already about what needs to change. So, in terms of why women die during or after childbirth, the biggest cause of death is blood clots. So there's a proposal that by 2027, all the hospital trusts have to introduce early investigation to find out whether a woman would be at higher risk of blood clots, so that they can provide, treatment in advance, so blood thinners and more monitoring to make sure that women don't suffer those kind of problems. Heart disease is the next thing, and these are often people who will already have some heart disease problems, but they may or may not know about it. And it's the extra strain that pregnancy puts on your body that makes those come out. So again, there's a proposal that there will be, for those who already know about it, there will be more specialist care for those women. And again, more monitoring to identify those women who might be subject to that. Perhaps really upsettingly, one of the big causes of maternal death, especially just after childbirth, is suicide. And what they want to do is introduce more mental health assessment during pregnancy and afterwards. I think that's a good idea. I think it needs to be done sensitively because, I do think that when you are pregnant and when you have just had a child, I don't want anybody to take this in the wrong way, but I do think you are a bit mental, because that bringing that life into the world becomes such an important thing to you. And I remember when I had my first child, I just stayed awake all night just listening to him breathing, just to make sure he took the next breath. Not because there was anything wrong with him. He's a perfectly healthy baby, but your whole focus is absolutely on looking after that child. And I don't know, I don't play this card very often, but I don't think men can ever really quite grasp how that is, what that does to you and your the way that you prioritise things and the way that your life is. So, absolutely, let's have more mental health assessment, but let's make it targeted and sensitive to the things that women are going through. I don't want every woman who's lying awake every night listening to a baby breathe being told that she is, having some kind of mental breakdown, because I don't think she is. I just think that is the way that things are for you in that situation. The other things that women die of are things like stroke, sepsis, because obviously once you've had a lot of medical intervention, the risk of infection is high, hence high rates of sepsis. And bleeding, people, women just bleeding out. So, all of those things require really targeted care. And we talked earlier, didn't we, in a jokey way about how to remove the barriers to people having children. And I think one of the things that we can do is to provide the best, the most high quality maternal care, so that women who are thinking about having a child don't hear all these horrible nightmare stories that actually are coming out of this review. So as I say, that's all. It's all quite sensitive and tricky things to talk about, but I think it is stuff we do need to talk about. Sorry if I'm
who
bringing you down.
who commissioned the review?
It's a government review, and as I say, it's in 3 steps. So she's going back to do more work before she comes out with final recommendations. But the work she's done so far, not just on maternal deaths now, but more widely, the recommendations that she's made. I mean, some of it seems like really obvious. So one of the things she said is that the quality of the estates, the quality of the hospital buildings is just very poor in some circumstances. So she has examples of, for example, they couldn't use one of the facilities because of the leak, because it was raining and the water was pouring in. So that part of the facility had to be closed down. Lots of examples of cases where maternity services are being provided in a building where there's inadequate toilet facilities and people have to walk a long way. And, that's tricky when you've just had a baby. I'll tell you without going into too much detail. You need to have those facilities on hand. She's also identified some things like cultural issues where there's a culture in some maternity facilities of insensitivity, I would say, and she's identified some areas where lead clinicians, the kind of culture that they're setting is not appropriate. And as in any organisation, culture is always set from the top. And if, that culture is that you don't listen to concerns that are being raised either by patients or staff, then that's a problem. And that culture needs to be addressed. It's in every organisation. I think that's the thing that is the hardest thing to change, tackling culture. But so it's good that she's identified that. Things like inadequate staffing levels. So a lot of midwives were saying that in their evidence that the time given for antenatal appointments is too small, too short, and you need more time to build up a rapport and a relationship with people who are going to be mothers. And things like the balance of staff. So if you think about who provides the services, the medical services to a pregnant woman, it's nurses, it's midwives, it's doctors, it's radiographers. Thank you. There's 2 words, isn't it?
Radiologist.
Yeah. What's the difference now? I don't. Yeah.
Might not be a word.
But anyway, people who do the scans, and having the right mix of people available at the right time is not quite working. You probably won't be surprised at this one, IT systems. So, having a really big written case file where you can't make the connections between what somebody wrote 3 weeks ago because you haven't got time to read it. I think this is one case where you kind of think AI should be able to help with that. If we had proper, digitised and up-to-date patient records where, AI could be going through those and saying, oh, by the way, have you noticed that happened 3 weeks ago and that's happening now, and is there a connection? And not taking over from the medics, but prompting the medics to think about things that maybe they don't think about because they're not reading that thing that happened 3 weeks ago. So she's identified lots of these things that I think are perhaps not surprising. But hopefully, once she does her final report, there will be real action taken so that we can have that best quality service that is a way that does support us to help those people who do want to start families and build families.
Well, you're optimistic.
Do
you not think that there's a chance that a review like this, it's similar to, do you remember the Cunliffe review of the water industry? And they said when the review started that the idea of nationalising the water industry was taken off the table.
Yeah.
And I worry that a lot of these reviews take place in a very small silo where any big changes that would need to happen are ignored.
Yeah.
And they just do some tweaking. And tweaks might be good. But
Yes.
a lot of these things that you're talking about, they're probably more structural things within the NHS and outside of the NHS. And that we were talking before about policies that help people to start a family. It's all of these things play a role. And do you not think there's a chance that they will ignore those?
I don't think any of this is easy. I think people like to pretend that you can come out with a review and you can say, you know, bish, bash, bosh, do these things, it's all sorted. I think often some of those, it's something that people do all the time, don't they? They get a report and they say, oh, we accept that report in full and we'll implement it in full. And you kind of think, that can't be the right answer.
No.
There has to be a discussion and a debate about it. So, for example, one of the things that it seems that she's edging towards is the idea of providing more specialist maternity care. Now, if you do that, you're probably going to be providing it further away from home for most women.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have, for example, if you think about the Northwest, if you have a specialist Northwest maternity hub where perhaps women who've got prior heart disease conditions are sent, they'll be sent there from all around the Northwest. Yeah. And actually, when you're starting a family or building a family, you probably want those services near to home. And you can't resolve both of those things by one answer. So, you know, I think if that is something that comes out of the report, there then needs to be more debate with the public about, you know, this is why this recommendation has been made. We as government are minded to accept it, but what does everybody, what's the views? How do we engage with people to make sure we hear those views? And I think engaging on maternity services is actually quite difficult because if you're in the thick of it, of receiving maternity services, you probably don't want to be going to a consultation meeting about maternity services. Probably got other things on your mind, you know. You're decorating the nursery and you're choosing clothes and you're arguing about names and all those kind of things. You probably don't want to be involved in that.
You're also carrying a human being inside you.
Indeed, yeah. If you're not yet receiving maternity services, you're probably you don't really know what the issues would be for you. You don't understand how you're going to feel when you are pregnant. And later on, you know, once you've finished your childbearing period, you probably feel that you're not the right person to engage. So, you know, even how do you run that engagement, I think is quite a tricky question. But I think these are all the things that we need to think about. How do we re-engage? How do we rebuild politics so that government and the people can understand more about what they want from each other? And, you know, that's not a thing particular to maternity services. That's the thing more widely, isn't it? So we were talking in my local election campaign about the fact that when local politicians want to know what we, the public, think, they do these kind of consultation exercises where you fill in a form and you tick boxes. And often even the questions that they ask assume a certain outcome. Yes, exactly. And I've started so many of those and I've started trying to answer the questions and I kind of think, well, I can't answer that question because that assumes, I think, something that I don't think.
Yeah, one recently was the empty homes consultation that Manchester City Council ran. And I was intrigued by it. It's sort of, I think you might have sent it to me. And it was a fringe thing that I hadn't really thought too much about. You know, there are these empty homes in Manchester. There's not that many of them, to be honest. And I thought, well, who are the people that are responding to these sorts of consultations? How do they even know that they're happening? So I went along and it was hard for me to actually find somebody to speak to. But they gave me a survey to fill in. And the first question was, which of these issues is the most problematic for you regarding empty homes? Noise on the street, houses not being lived in, or, you know, these four answers. And I thought, what if empty homes is no problem for me? Mm-hmm. They've not considered that, right? And they have this idea, and the council, and I spoke to them about it within the housing department of Manchester City Council, the person that this council officer that was working there, and we talked at length about housing, and I realised, right, okay, they've got a preconceived notion of what this thing is, which is empty homes are a real problem. You know, when they're struggling to house people in Manchester, we talked loads about the housing crisis, particularly in Manchester as a growing city, not enough homes for people. What should we do with these empty homes? Oh, we need to speak to the public and find out exactly why they're so frustrated with these empty homes, not questioning whether that's actually a problem in the first place. So, yeah, the consultations, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So we've strayed a long way from the original topic, haven't we? But I think it's all helpful stuff. And I think, you know, we need to have more things like town hall meetings again. You know, we need to engage face-to-face with politicians locally. Not quite sure how we do that nationally, but I do think that political discussion and debate, we need to reinvent that in order to solve all kinds of problems that we face.
I absolutely agree. We might disagree on the monarchy. We agree on this. I also think that when you're looking at this issue of the maternity care, I think it fits in a way it's really hard to understand what people want with the structures that have been developed over the last 40, 50 years, particularly with like the way the society has become a lot more digital. And it's hard to kind of have a cross-section of the public. Like, where do you find them? Right?
Yeah.
In the past, you'd have found them in certain places. And now we do a lot of that stuff online, and we don't go down to the post office and the butchers and all this. And so you want to create new structures and new institutions that enable people to really not just have their voices heard, because that's quite a political term, isn't it?
Yeah.
But like actually contribute.
To blether on at each other.
To what?
Blether on.
Okay.
Scottish term, I think, blether. Talk.
Is it blather?
Well, I think they pronounce it blether.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perhaps Scottish listeners can let us know.
But this is, and just like in the first section where I was talking about the policies of these new parties and the way that the political landscape is changing, this is something that's interesting about the era we're in politics, particularly in Britain, is that it might seem like all doom and gloom, but it's being rebuilt. It's being destroyed and rebuilt, right? And it's, you know, you can't change the course of history, but you can affect it, and you can ride the waves, if you like, and you can contribute to whether we do these things better in the future. And I think the idea of rebuilding new institutions and structures for people to properly communicate and figure out what people want from our governments, from our local government, I think is really exciting.
Yeah, it is. That's a good positive note to end on, isn't it?
We did it. We found a nice positive, upbeat thing to end on.
Good. Excellent. Thanks for listening. As always, please like and recommend us to your friends, and we will see you again next week.
And if you want to come and help us campaign in Manchester and in Sale, then let us know. You're welcome.
Yeah, all welcome. Yeah.